Thank you very much, Mr. Addington. Before moving to member questions, I do have one quick procedural matter. I would ask unanimous consent that the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Bentz, be allowed to sit and participate as well in today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. The chair will now recognize members for 5 minutes of questions, and we're going to begin by recognizing the gentleman from Montana, Mr. Downing, for 5 minutes. Mr. Downing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Director Addington, thank you for being here today. In my home district of central and eastern Montana, violent crime tragically continues to plague Indian country. Despite making up 7% of the state's population, tribal victims represent 26% of Montana's missing person cases. One piece of feedback that I consistently receive from Montana tribal leaders is their decades-long frustrations with BIA and its support for tribal law enforcement. Static funding distributions based off of baselines from the late 1990s, along with difficulties with BIA regional offices, have left many tribes feeling helpless in the face of surging criminal activity. So, Director Addington, I really appreciate your testimony highlighting this administration's efforts to support tribal criminal investigations. However, at a broader level, can you elaborate on how BIA is working to correct these historical tribal law enforcement resource gaps?
Well, thank you for that question, and I'm happy to report back. I just was in Montana last week meeting with tribal law enforcement officials as well as the U.S. Attorney and our other federal partners, and we did hear from some of the tribal law enforcement agencies and got to visit with them about how we're going to collaborate more with them to ensure that they have the resources they need to address the violent crime. So what we're doing in Montana is we put additional resources up there. We've got 3 missing and murdered agents actually stationed there in the Billings office, as well as 1 at Blackfeet. And then we're looking at also additional drug agents up there in the area that's working very closely with the tribal law enforcement agencies. They're actually doing mobile enforcement team operations and working hand in hand with the tribal law enforcement folks to make sure that we're meeting their needs and addressing the violent crime that's occurring on their reservations. One of the other things that we're doing to help them with resources in our missing and murdered unit is under the secretarial order, we're refocusing the missing murdered resources, and we're actually going to begin funding tribal officers to be part of these task forces. So the collaboration and getting those resources to the boots on the ground out there is paramount for us. So we are actually working with those tribes to provide those resources.
Well, thank you. So to elaborate on that, how does the BIA's Missing and Murdered Unit cooperate with other law enforcement agencies, including the FBI, tribal law enforcement, and what barriers remain to timely coordination?
So we work very well with our other federal partners, the FBI, HSI, all the other federal partners, and then we're working very closely with our tribal partners, making sure that our BIA offices is including them in the conversations. Because most of these cases are getting solved at the ground level. In the past, part of the issue is someone don't want someone from an office, 300-400 miles away, telling them what they need to do. They need somebody there on the ground, and we are actually sending people out there, boots on the ground, to help the tribes address these issues.
Thank you. You mentioned in your testimony Secretary Burgum establishing the Indian Country Violent Crime Task Force in May of this year. Can you elaborate on the role this task force will play in promoting public safety in Indian Country?
Yes, it's similar to what we did with the cold case offices. This will be the first time that we've had a specific Indian Country violent crime task force that we're developing, where we're going to partner up with our tribal partners and our other federal partners, where we're going to address the open cases that's occurring out in Indian Country that's not getting the attention because either there's other things that they're doing, or maybe it's a case that just needs some extra attention. So we're going to work with the tribes to identify all those cases, and then we're going to assign resources to that, which tribes will actually be a part of these task force offices, the tribes, the federal government, and then we're going to also look at what we do to help them reduce violent crime that's occurring on their reservation through intelligence-led policing. So it's kind of a multifaceted approach this task force is going to be. It's not only going to be working cases, but it's also going to be working hand in hand with the tribes to reduce violent crime.
Well, thank you for those answers. Tragically, criminal actors have for way too long exploited jurisdictional uncertainty and a lack of law enforcement resources to terrorize Indian country. Reversing the cycle of violence will require directly addressing the issues that have historically hindered effective law enforcement coordination between tribes and the BIA. So I really appreciate your testimony today, and I look forward to working with your offices on addressing these challenges going forward. And on that, Mr. Chair, I yield back my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. At this time, the chair recognizes the gentlewoman from the state of Washington, Ms. Randall, for 5 minutes. Ms. Randall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director Addington, you were just highlighting the work of the Missing and Murdered Unit and noted that the department's budget request would support 26 full-time positions. One of our witnesses on the next panel has shared that the MMU hasn't responded to her family in a case for several months, and that's something that needs to be addressed. Can you tell us a little bit more about the MMU? How many of the staff work exclusively on missing and murdered cases, and what other type of cases are they working on?
Yes, ma'am. Well, thank you for the question. And this is one of the things where we talk about in the secretarial order about the refocusing of the missing and murdered unit. In the past, there's maybe the difference in how they prioritize maybe some of the work that the missing and murdered unit's been doing. I think, they've kind of worked on other things like predatory crimes and some different things. And we've started, as part of this secretarial order, a predatory crime unit specifically to work on those cases. So that takes that ability away from the missing and murdered agents and puts it in its own unit. So that's going to allow them to focus more time on responding to missing person and cold cases. And that's what we're doing, redirecting their resources specifically back to those two core functions. And that's kind of what you're talking about. There was times where maybe some of our agents were working other type of cases, and we want to make sure that they're working those core functions. And then the other thing is making sure we get those positions filled. As I don't have to tell anyone on this committee how public safety is very difficult to fill positions, not only in the federal government, but across states, counties, tribes. It's very difficult. So we're working very diligently to make sure that we're filling those positions. So we've got someone there that can respond. And like I just spoke about a minute ago, we're also going to be putting those resources to fund tribal officers so they can have that resource directly there on the ground to be part of these task forces, which is going to help as well.
Thank you so much for sharing more about that. And absolutely, we all recognize the challenges in recruiting and retaining law enforcement across jurisdictions, including in Indian country. And I just want to give another shout out to my colleague Dan Newhouse for his leadership on ensuring that tribal law enforcement officers have the benefits that they need to stay in Indian country once often they're trained there and then get recruited elsewhere because of the benefits, and that benefit parity is going to help us, I think, across sectors have trained law enforcement. I do want to ask also about the Assistant Secretary's Order 8, which would reorganize the Office of Justice without tribal consultation, and also added a politically appointed principal director for justice services and law enforcement. Since this changes how BIA law enforcement reports within the agency, some tribal leaders have expressed some concerns that this move might politicize the office and the services that it provides. Can you tell us why the department decided to move OJS reporting structure from BIA to the Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs, and why it was done without tribal consultation?
Well, thank you for that question. And I think there may be some confusion on exactly what that does. The Office of Justice Services is still within the Bureau of Indian Affairs. The only thing that actually changed is the reporting structure of the director, and it still reports to a career person, not to a political. So it's to make sure that the Office of Justice Services has the capabilities to be at the table and is prioritized in the manner that it needs to be. So everything else is still basically the same with the Office of Justice Services. Nothing has changed there other than it is now reporting to me, which I'm a career person and not a political.
Okay, well, we'll stay engaged, and if it seems like there is a change, I know you'll want us to raise it to you right away about how that reporting structure impacts folks on the ground. Thank you for being here, Mr. Addington, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields. At this time, the chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. Mr. Addington, thank you very much for being here this morning and preparing for today's hearing and reading your testimony and the testimony of the witnesses from our second panel. I saw a focus on technology, data, AI systems, additional resources. If you had to identify the biggest single reason MMIP cases still go unsolved, what would that reason be? Is it jurisdictional complexity? Is it investigative capacity, lack of coordination, or something else?
Thank you for that question. And a lot of missing person cases or cold cases are sometimes investigative leads run out and we don't look at all the resources or all the analytical resources that's out there to make sure that we have the tools to help solve these cases. And that's one of the things you'll hear from one of the witnesses in the next panel on the DNA testing that we have actually really leaned into at the Missing and Murdered Unit to help solve some of these cases. We've had some great success by using these DNA tools to help us come up and identify victims, identify suspects, where it would have took lots of human hours to investigate these cases. And a lot of times we find that these leads are hard to come up with if you don't have someone calling in tips, if you don't have a break in the case, they just go cold and there's nowhere to turn because investigators have basically kept going to dead ends constantly. And I think that's the biggest thing that we've run into on these cases. And I think these new tools that we're now branching out into is giving us the ability to move these cases forward in a lot of areas. But we are working with on the state side of cases because we do have a lot of indigenous persons that's actually not in our jurisdiction, but they're in a state jurisdiction. And we've had a lot of great success with working with the states to help bring our resources to help them. We don't want to come and take the cases away from them, of course, because we don't have primary jurisdiction, but we want to offer our help to help them solve those cases. So we're seeing some really good coordination with the state agencies to bring our resources that we have to help them solve those cases as well.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Addington. Many of the recommendations and things that we're talking about today focus on improving investigations after someone has gone missing, which is really important. But I wanted to just step back and talk a little bit about the cause piece and focusing on prevention. Let's say we were to reconvene in 3 years' time. What objective metrics would persuade members of Congress that we've actually reduced the MMIP crisis rather than simply improving our ability to investigate it?
I think a couple of things. I think one is the missing person piece of it. We've got to do more to make sure that it's not just a law enforcement problem. It's a social problem as well. We have a lot of people that goes missing, a lot of young people, where we have things that's going on in the communities that we need to address through other means as well. So law enforcement has to team up with our social services partners and different things to help address some of those issues with some of our young people in the communities. But we also have to work to make sure that we're responding. If we have a missing person, we are finding now with people responding immediately, we're finding these people very quickly and getting them out of harm's way. And I think that's one thing that we're actually seeing in our metrics is like we're finding these people very quickly and bringing them to safety. And then on the cold case side, it's being able to solve some of these cases using some of these these DNA and different metrics to help us solve those cases and bring results to family members. I think at the end of the day, if we can get more of that, that's going to be the telling story.
What would we look to? Like, where would those data or those facts be collected? Like, what's the resource that we could look to as members of Congress to say, yes, we're moving in the right direction on those things?
So our missing and murdered unit would be collecting all of that data, and then we have to utilize, of course, the FBI has NCIC, so we do, when somebody goes missing, they are entered into NCIC, and we try to collect that data as well to see how many people are in there, and then they take them out once they're found. So there's multiple different databases that we have to look at to get those metrics, but then there's also the NAMUS, that it's not a mandatory reporting system, but it is a system we work very closely with. And the department did work with them back in 2019 or 20, I believe, to actually put some demographics in their system to where we can actually identify if a person is Native, if they're a member of a federally recognized tribe, if they come up missing from a reservation, all these different demographics that we can actually search now. So that's another system that we can get metrics out of as well.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Addington. I see my time has expired at this time. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Huffman, for 5 minutes. Mr. Huffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Director Addington. I want to ask you about how we're making good on what sounds like a shared commitment to addressing this crisis. And I want to focus in on understanding the actual needs on the ground. As you know, the Tribal Law and Order Act requires BIA to submit an annual report identifying existing funding, staffing needs, and estimated costs for public safety and justice programs. So just for starters, does the administration intend to publish the reports for 2025 and 26?
Well, thank you for that question. I think the latest report is going through the vetting process right now, and we've published all the others, and it is going through the vetting process, so it should be out.
Any sense on when we will see those published reports?
I don't have a time frame, but I will take the information back and check and see when it will be published.
All right. Thank you. So despite having a hiring waiver for this administration's mass workforce reductions, GAO reports that OJS experienced a 4% workforce reduction between January and July of last year. Recruitment and retention, we know, is a longstanding issue with significant impacts. And earlier this year, the committee heard testimony that OJS remains severely understaffed, and this leaves families waiting, sometimes months, to receive responses from the missing and murdered unit, the MMU. So, Director Addington, do you believe that allowing families to wait months for any contact from the MMU is appropriate or acceptable?
Well, thank you for that question. It's very important to me that we respond immediately, whether it's whatever unit is within Office of Justice Services. And we're working very diligently to make sure we're filling positions within the organization.
Do you consider the current level of response and the current wait times acceptable?
We can always do better. It's always, I don't think anyone could ever say at any public safety program that I've worked with in my many years that we could always do better in what we're doing.
What is the current vacancy rate within both OGAS and the MMU, if you know?
It fluctuates. So, like, we have someone that we hire people, and then if we get someone that gets promoted, or we have someone goes to a different unit, it fluctuates constantly. So, one of the big hurdles that we have is kind of what you all have talked about earlier, is the backgrounds. It takes a long time for us to get a background done on a position after selected, and if that person that we select then decides, hey, it's taking too long, I'm going to move on to a different position or go somewhere else, then we start all over again. So that level can fluctuate. But
you're not able to peg a specific vacancy rate as we sit here?
I can't give you exactly, but most of our positions are filled within the MMU. We've got a few that's vacant, but it's not a large number in the MMU.
In May, the department issued Secretarial Order 3450, honoring our commitment to protecting Indian country communities. And that order states that the MMU will focus on responding to missing person cases, investigating homicides and cold cases, and processing crime scenes. Can you provide more detail on how this secretarial order will change operations of the MMU?
Yes, sir. Well, thank you for that question. I alluded to it a little bit earlier. I think in the past they've kind of got to where they were working on some things other than their core responsibilities. So we're refocusing them back on those core responsibilities and making sure any other responsibilities are dedicated to other branches or other divisions. And one of the things that we've just done is we've just hired a brand new division chief for the missing and murdered unit that's got a different vision for the program. Sabrina Desitel, she's sitting here in the audience, and we just selected her. She's coming from Washington State. She's an assistant special agent in charge with us right now, and she also comes with a tribal background, being a public safety director for the Colville tribe. So she's bringing a different perspective to this unit, and that's what I'm looking for to bring in to make sure that we're refocusing the resources to what we're supposed to be doing with this. So that's what we're doing.
Understood. Other than the change in personnel, can you identify any specific changes, though, to operations of the MMU as a result of this secretarial order?
Yeah, so the response to missing person cases. So we're making sure that there is an MMU agent that is responding immediately to a report of a missing person. Prior to now, they may get on the phone with them and do analyticals and different things, but we're actually making sure that there is a agent responding as well as providing those other resources. We also have a lot of other resources. We've got underwater drones, we've got ground penetrating radar, all these other resources that's available to the tribes and to the BIA agencies out there. We're making sure that all of those are available immediately to everyone.
All right, thank you, sir. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. At this time, the chair recognizes his colleague, the chairman of the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee, the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Gosar, for 5 minutes. Mr. Gosar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Addington, with 22 federally recognized tribes, Arizona is unfortunately too familiar with this MMIP crisis. In 2023, a series of Phoenix substance abuse recovery facilities targeted tribal members, some of which were declared missing persons. To operate this scam, recruiters targeted vulnerable tribal members seeking help for substance abuse and held them in rehab facilities to fleece the government of Medicaid and other healthcare benefits. Have you uncovered other cases like the dangerous and fraudulent Phoenix rehab facilities that exacerbated the MMIP crisis?
Thank you for that question. I don't have any analytics specifically on that. As we look at each one of these cases, we do look at background, but I don't have anything specific that I can provide you without going back and
do you have any idea if there are other cases with that, or would you have to get back to me as well?
I think it's very, I would have to go back and look. I don't want to speculate, but every case usually has a background behind it, so I would have to go back and look.
The Subcommittee on EMR just discussed Earth MRI and the use of LIDAR to examine Earth's geology, but this LIDAR is also being used to identify remains. Is that correct?
Can you repeat that?
Yes. The EMR Subcommittee just discussed Earth MRI and its use in LIDAR to examine the Earth's geology. But this LIDAR is also being used to identify remains. Is that correct?
We are using the technology too. We have LIDAR. We have different scanners. We got all kinds of different technology that we're using to identify remains.
Is there anything that you're maybe aware of that's very new on the horizon that can be utilized in helping tribes with this MMIP crisis?
I think the biggest thing is our DNA and our analytics is the biggest thing that's helping tribes. I know our DNA resources that we're using through Othram right now has been a big help in, we've had multiple cases that we've responded to where if it wouldn't have been for the DNA resources and been able to get that DNA, we wouldn't have been able to identify a suspect in these cases fairly quickly. I think that's been a big push to get us using this new technology to actually reduce the human aspect of it to where we're spending a lot of hours doing investigations to where we can use these analytical tools to reduce that amount of time and actually bring justice quicker.
Now, is there any kind of possibility to utilize like an Amber Alert? And what would be the disadvantages or advantages of something like that?
No, we absolutely want to use Amber Alert in the states. A lot of the different states have specific alerts that we want to make sure that we're utilizing. We want to work specifically with those states to make sure that we're getting alerts out for tribes as soon as someone goes missing, because that is a key tool in finding missing persons, is that we get a response as quick as possible out there in case someone runs across them, and they run their name or someone sees them, they can report that so we can get them located.
Now, would there be any problem with that, in regards the cooperation with that? Do you see any hang-ups? Because this is a technology I think it will work very, very well.
I think in most cases it is. I know some states, we have heard from tribes where there's been some issues with maybe states putting some tribal notifications out, but I think they're trying to work through those to make sure that they've got a good relationship with the state to put those local alerts out as well.
From your experience, is there one weak point in regards to this communication system for tribes?
I think the biggest thing is to make sure that we get it out everywhere. And I think, Amber Alert works well, but it also works in certain regions. So you need to make sure that if someone comes up missing, that we're getting the information to the authorities of where that missing person may be going to, and make sure we get it out wide enough to cover any areas that they may be missing or be going to.
Thank you, Mr. Addington. I'll yield back to some of my time. Thank you.
The gentleman yields. At this time, the chair recognizes the gentleman from the state of Oregon, Ms. Hoyle, for 5 minutes. Ms. Hoyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank you for your testimony today, Mr. Addington. This is an important and overdue hearing. The MMIP epidemic is one of the most serious public safety crises facing Indian country today, and it's a tragedy that no family or community should have to endure. The federal government has a trust responsibility to help protect the safety and well-being of tribal communities, and for too long we've fallen short of that responsibility. In Oregon, a public law 280 state, tribal communities know of countless cases of missing and murdered Indigenous peoples across the state, but because of lack of staffing, chronic underfunding, and jurisdictional confusion, we may never know the true numbers. I know you're familiar with this issue. But these stories are more than numbers. They're daughters, sisters, mothers, sons, fathers, and children whose families are still waiting for answers and justice. Families should not have to fight for justice to be served, and tribal land should never be open season for perpetrators to commit these tragedies. I'm most concerned about the staffing shortages at the BIA. For decades, the BIA's federal public safety programs serving tribal communities have struggled with inadequate resources, and the Trump administration's budget cuts have just made this problem worse. For example, I'm aware that the Missing and Murdered Unit, or MMU, is being consolidated in the President's fiscal year 2027 budget request into a single budget line. This office is critical for tribes to navigate the on-the-ground challenges of investigating and prosecuting these crimes. And if we're serious about supporting Native nations, we need to make sure critical public safety programs have the staff and resources necessary to do their jobs. I strongly support practical solutions to make sure tribes have reliable partners at every level, tribal, local, state, and federal, to investigate these cases and deliver justice for victims and families. But I don't see how that can happen if the federal public safety programs tribal communities rely on face significant funding cuts. So a couple of questions. One, public law 280 tribes face unique jurisdictional challenges. How is the BIA working to support PL 280 tribes and law enforcement?
Well, thank you for that question. And we do run into this quite often in a public law 280 state, where we have to work hand in hand with the tribes in the state to make sure we bridge those jurisdictional gaps. And we do that. We try to get cross-deputization and make sure that there is no jurisdictional gaps, and that we've got mutual aid agreements where we can help each other, so we can bring resources to the table to help the state or the tribe in those areas, so there's not one agency that's saying, okay, I'm responsible for everything. We want to be a partner in that. We want to make sure that we're helping tribes bridge those gaps with those states so there's no jurisdictional infighting of who's going to be responding to what. If it's on the reservation, we want to make sure the tribes are involved in those investigations and ever how we can bridge those gaps. We do that in all the public law 280 states.
All right, thank you. How will you make sure, as we're using technology, how will you make sure that any data sharing agreement utilized by the BIA OJS aligns with tribal data sovereignty?
So if tribes are submitting their data, our data doesn't go out to any other agencies other than the federal agencies that we're required to report to. So we wouldn't be sharing their data with a non-federal agency unless the tribes shared that data with them. So we try to protect that data since it is submitted to us, and it only goes to the people that we're required to share it with, like the criminal reporting requirements.
And then data that is received, picked up by federal agencies, will that be shared with tribes?
Yes, the tribes should be able to go on to DOJ's website because we report it to DOJ as well. So when the tribes submit to us, then we report to DOJ, and then it actually gets published by DOJ.
All right, and reciprocally, vice versa, right?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. And my next question was, how do you make sure tribes as sovereign nations will be full federal partners in prosecuting these crimes? But there's only 11 more seconds, but I would like to have a full answer on that because that is critical and not a balance that we've necessarily seen in the past.
Yeah, and we're working with the U.S. Attorney's offices to make sure that tribal cases are being prosecuted to the fullest extent as well, and they're not falling through a gap. Because I was actually working for a tribe once I retired from the federal government a few years ago. I went and ran a tribal program, and I seen on the tribal side we had some work to do to make sure our cases were actually getting prosecuted, and we worked very closely with the U.S. Attorney's office to make sure those cases were getting prosecuted, but we got to make sure we're bridging those gaps as well.
Great, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair.